It has been a long slog in Texas. You know, you mentioned my mom. My mom was part of the Mexican American civil rights movement in Texas in the 1960s and 70s. And they were fighting a lot of these same issues: voter suppression, gerrymandering, the denial or the attack of voting rights during those decades. And it's almost as if we've come full circle now in Texas and in other parts of the country. And so let me give you a sense, really over about the last dozen years or so, of what's been going on in Texas and why I think Texas has been ground zero for a lot of these voter suppression efforts. So I got into the Texas legislature when I was 23 years old in 2000 or 28 years old, I'm sorry, in 2003. And so I served 10 years there, and I'm now in my 10th year in the Congress. And starting around 2011, the Republicans were successful in passing a slate of voter suppression laws. The one that got the most attention, of course, was voter ID. Obviously we know that voter ID, basically like other voter suppression tactics, is kind of a point shaving tactic. In other words, with voter ID, for example, you know that 96% of people may be able to get that ID that they need to go vote on election day or go vote early. But you know there's going to be a certain percentage of people who aren't going to have their ID that day, or they lost their driver's license, or they go and they show up, they don't have the ID and they can't make it back because they got to go to work, so they end up not voting. Well, so Republicans set up a bunch of point shaving ways to try to hold on to power. So it wasn't just voter ID, it was other kind of what I would call behind the scenes tactics. So for example, let me give you a concrete example. It used to be in Texas, just like it is in other places, that if you were deputized to register people to vote, if I was deputized in Bexar County, I could go register people throughout the state to register. Now, what they did in 2011 was they made it so that there are 254 counties in Texas. Wherever you want to register voters, you have to be deputized in that specific county. And so it was a way to put different obstacles in place to make it harder, not only to get to have people vote, but also to register them and to mobilize them. As Cecile mentioned, there are also now criminal penalties for friends or relatives who maybe try to help somebody vote by mail, for example. They also, over the years, cut down on the number of polling sites in different places in Texas. And so it has been just obstacle after obstacle that has been put in the way of people in Texas being able to vote. One of the most pernicious ones is that you still can't register online to vote in Texas. I mean, you can do everything else. You can pay your fees, you can renew your driver's license, all of these things, but you can't register to vote. And so it's an amazing way, very pernicious ways that they have been able to stunt voting in Texas. Because of that, we've got still one of the lowest participation rates. We're constantly ranked in the bottom 5 states in voter participation. And these tactics are a big part of why. But I should say, because I think it was Michael that mentioned the big lie, and I was part of the second impeachment trial team in the Senate that sought the impeachment of President Trump, or the conviction of President Trump. But Republicans in many states have moved. I would call these tactics that I just described, that Cecile described, these are tactics to try to shape your reality or shape the voting outcome. That's one thing. Those are bad enough. But they've moved beyond just trying to shape the outcome to trying to imagine the outcome now. Like, even when they lose, now they're imagining an outcome and trying to make that the reality. And that was what the big lie is you lose and then still claim that you won, which is obviously fantastical, and an even greater escalation, I would say, than even passing laws in a legislature to make it tougher to vote. Now you're just imagining an outcome. You're imagining a reality. And I think that's what makes it so dangerous to our democracy, is that you move beyond even just passing laws in a legislature, which again are horrible enough because you're making it harder to vote and mobilize people and register people. But now you're still losing, and you're imagining a completely different outcome, and you're selling that outcome. I think that's what Donald Trump added to the mix. Is that I think you're right. I mean, like I said, these things have been going on for years. Gerrymandering has been going on for decades, as you all know. right? So that's nothing new. But what changed is that he really sold the imagination of an outcome, a false reality. And since then, Republicans have picked up that mantle and are running with it. And I would argue now that in many places, the price of admission into winning the nomination in a Republican primary for a congressional seat, certainly, but also in other races, is that you have to be willing to imagine that false outcome. And you'll see this happen when a TV interviewer asks some Republicans, was Joe Biden elected president? And some of them won't say yes. Some will concede Joe Biden is the president, but they don't want to have to say Joe Biden actually won the election, because then they feel like they're going to betray Donald Trump and all of his folks will come down on them in the primary and so forth. So that to me is what makes these things, what makes our democracy, what puts it in such peril, is that you're no longer dealing with a lot of people that are in a reality.